Hey everybody, this is Brooks Summer with Living the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas Life and the Chad Smith Real Estate Solutions team. And we are going to talk about the 2023 real estate market. Is it going to crash? I don't know. But what we do know is what the data tells us. So let's go ahead and discuss that right now. If this is your first time to our channel and you're wanting to know what's happening in the North Texas real estate market, go ahead, subscribe, ring the bell so you can be notified when we put up new video content. Also, if you are considering making a move to North Texas from out of state, or you're currently living in Texas and you want to know what's happening in the specific area that you want to live, make sure that you look in the description for a link to schedule a consultation call where we can dive into these numbers specific to you and specific to your home search. Now, one of the things that I think is really important whenever it comes to is the market going to crash in 2023 is that we separate the fact from the fiction, that we actually look at the numbers and then we contextualize what all has transpired in the lead up to 2022 and what is coming in 2023. And one of the big things that I find that's going to be most important in influencing or informing us is going to be what happened in that 2005 to 2012 time period, because that's what is most recent in people's mind. That's what people are actually referring to when they ask, is the market going to crash in 2023? And I don't have a crystal ball, and anyone who tells you that they know what's going to happen in 2023 is talking out of their hat. And so I think the only way for us to really figure out what the best case scenario for 2023 in regard to accuracy is when we start looking at the numbers. And so one of the groups that does this is the National Association of Realtors. They continue to put out different information for agents to use, as well as individuals that are looking to buy or sell, to get a good idea about what's happening in the market when it comes to real estate. So they recently put out their real estate forecast for 2023, and there are several things in here that I agree with. There's a couple of things that isn't in here, but that they said whenever they were doing the presentation that I don't 100% agree with, and we'll get into that here in a second. If you are thinking about making a move in 2023 and purchasing a house, or maybe selling and buying, and you're wanting to weigh your options, go ahead, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, in the description, you are going to find a way to set up on our calendar a time for us to discuss in depth the real estate market, as well as your goals for purchasing or selling a house. And that's where we like to start with individuals, is we like to find out what exactly you're looking for in a home, and then where is the area that you're looking, and then talk to you about putting a game plan in place, helping you weigh your options to figure out if now's a good time or if you should wait. I think that all of this is specific to the individual, and there's never really the best time to buy, and there's never really the worst time to buy. Everything is making an informed decision based upon your specific situation. We always recommend that someone plan on staying in a house 5 to 7 years. That's what we see as a full economic cycle on average. And because of that, you are able to weather the peaks and the troughs. You're able to rise with the highs and go down with the lows and come right back up so that you have additional equity. And that is one of the things that I think is really going to be key for anyone, is that you plan on staying there at that house for the long haul. And if you're not, well, we can talk about different things that you can do so that whenever you are prepared to get that 15 or 30-year mortgage, that you are set up for success based upon your specific situation. Whenever it comes to the National Association of Realtors Summit and Forecast, they've got several great slides on here, but I want to skip down to this one. Home price crashing coming. are the home prices going to crash in 2023? And when we're talking about a home price crash, normally we're talking about a difference of 20% in the reduction of a home's value from the peak. And that's not really a hard and fast rule, but what we do see is that most people think that if they lose 20% of their house equity or their home's value, then the market has crashed. So let's just go ahead and take that, for example, as it's kind of our baseline of what a definition of a housing crash would look like. And I think that that's very solid. We could say that in 2006 to 2012 that the housing market crashed. One of the things that the National Association of Realtors said about 2023 was that home values are not going to appreciate and they're not going to depreciate. This I don't agree with. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I definitely didn't sleep in a Holiday Inn last night. Slept in my own house, which, you know, I'm here to weather the storm. And so what I want to do in regard to that is I want to go back to 2006, 2007, and all the way up to 2012 and talk about that to put that context on any type of forecast for 2023. January 2007 was the kind of the beginning of the end. So what we saw was that the home values peaked of June of 2007. When it came to those home values, they peaked at about $209,000 on average for the average sale price for a home. In January of 2007, that time period, home values had increased in that 6 months 17%. From June 2007 to December of 2007, home prices dropped about 9%. Well, we saw something very similar here in January of 2022, going into June of 2022. Home values shot up 22%. And then from June 2022 to November of 2022, we've seen house prices drop by about 10%. And again, we're looking at the average sales price in the North Texas Real Estate Information Systems so that we can kind of compare these and make sure that we're looking at the same data. Though there are some discrepancies, whenever Netris in about 2012 transferred over from the old system to the new system, there were some parts of that data migration that didn't transfer, but I don't want to get bogged down into that. I just want to point that out because whenever you start to dig into months of inventory during that downturn period, it looks like it was very similar today, but I remember getting into the market, being Chad's assistant, helping him prepare graphs, which we now see that are created automatically through Netris Trends. But I remember having to go through and create the spreadsheet, take the Excel chart, and basically create it from scratch by comparing sales from month to month in order to come up with that data to plot that chart. What we recognized is that it was a major buyer's market. And what I mean by that is that there were more homes on the market than buyers were purchasing. So we had a high amount of months of supply. And we'll get into that more in a second. From the peak to the trough of 2006 to 2012, the peak was June 2007. The trough was December 2009, and what we saw was that the average sale price from June 2007 to December 2009 dropped about 20%. What we have seen so far from June of 2022 to November of 2022, we've seen a drop of about 10%. But again, prices shot up in that first 6 months, 22%. So we're actually, if we look at the average sales price, we're up 12%, even though we're down 10%. So again, that's some context that really, I think, helps to understand why I'm going to say that I don't think the market's going to crash as fundamentally as what many people think. And I think that when we look at the fundamentals, it's very important to understand the amount of foreclosures that made up the market back in 2007. So I pulled data from November of 2007 so that we can compare it to November of 2022. In November of 2007, we had about 25% of all closed transactions were foreclosures. So 1,285 sales in November of 2007 were foreclosures. And in November of 2007, 3,905 were actually sold by an individual. So that was 25%. And when I mentioned that to Chad said, yeah, we saw an average of 25% of homes during that period were foreclosure homes. Now, the thing to realize about a foreclosure house is that there were several months and up to several years that house was either vacant or it was neglected. We would see kids break into those homes. We would see parties. A lot of the carpet had to be torn out. There were holes in the sheetrock where people would knock holes in it. I had seen one house where the bricks were coming off of the veneer. And so the brick work that was there was just destroyed. We had seen appliances stolen, HVACs removed by either the bank or by vandals. Whenever I talk about a foreclosure, what you have to understand is that many of them were deeply distressed. The cost of the foreclosure rehab probably averaged during that time period about $20,000. And we saw all sorts of things. We saw people cohabitating with animals in their houses. One of the houses down the street from where I currently live, the story is that they had miniature horses that lived inside the house with them. Yeah, you heard that right. Miniature horses lived inside the house with them. We could also see sometimes like barn animals living inside the house, chickens, goats. In this business, I've realized that there are many things that you may not have ever thought that someone would put up with in the way that they lived, but it's very interesting, all the different things that you come across whenever you're working in real estate. So think about that. The foreclosures, the houses that were on the market, 25% of them were not in tip-top shape. They were just destroyed. And what led to that was the subprime boom. So a subprime borrower is someone who's borrowing under the 580 credit score. So that's considered subprime. A lot of those borrowers had a 500 credit score or even less, which meant that they weren't making their normal payments on smaller items. So this idea that they were going to pay this big mortgage and pay it on time and pay it for 30 years was a fool's errand. Not only did we have subprime borrowers, but at that same time, we had interest-only loans where individuals would basically rent the house from the bank because they were only paying their interest. They never were paying their principal, and that was a great situation as long as prices were appreciating. The moment that prices stopped appreciating, those individuals were underwater, and so their only remedy was a short sale, which is where they sold the house for less than they owed, and they had to get the bank's permission. So that's another situation where the property could have been distressed. The other one was an income stated loan that allowed the borrower to just state what their income was, and the bank never went through and verified it. And so you had people who may have made $20,000 to $40,000 saying that they made $100,000 because they thought they were actually getting one over on the bank. But those individuals were unfortunately set up for failure. There was no way that they were actually going to be able to make their principal and interest payments for 30 years because that would have been their total income. There was also another loan product out there which allowed people to roll in their closing costs and not put any money down. So you had some people who started off immediately underwater. So they would do a loan that was 103% or 105% of the home's value. And so they already started at a negative equity position. That is the run up to the 07 time period where we saw that peak in the market and then the trough in December of 09, for that 20% reduction in average sales price. Now, the difference between then and now is that the past 2 years, the things that characterized the buyers in that market were credit scores above 700. So they were conventional borrowers and they were putting down on average 5 to 20%. So the average was about 10% was what the buyer was putting down. They also were guaranteeing the offer amount, which was oftentimes well above asking, but they guaranteed it with a cash guarantee. When these buyers closed, they were already in a much better equity position because they were putting so much money down and putting so much cash into the property. Well, as you can imagine, that a borrower that is like that is financially more able to weather storms. They also have more of a commitment to sticking out with the house and riding a downturn through, as opposed to trying to short sale it or just allowing the bank to take over. When we look at November of 2022, foreclosures don't account for 25% of the market. They account for 0.5% of the market. In November of 2022, there were 31 foreclosure sales that closed out. Compare that to November of 2007, where there were 1,285 closed sales that were foreclosures. So the fundamentals going into this 2023 are totally different. Another thing to realize is that in 2008, interest rates were around 6%. Now, in 2009, interest rates were about 5%, and in 2011, interest rates were about 4%. So an individual could sell a house that had a higher interest rate and purchase a house with a lower interest rate. Now, what we're seeing based upon the data is that 50% of homeowners have an interest rate of 3.5% or less. Why does that matter, you may ask? Well, the reason why that matters is that these individuals who own these houses have cheap money tied up in them in regard to what their borrowing costs were. The reason why that's important in this scenario is that inventory most likely won't come from those homeowners. Those people, if they were to choose to buy a new house, they're most likely going to turn that home into a rental, and therefore it's not going to hit the market. If they do sell to unlock that equity, then they're also already in a better financial position to potentially pay cash for another house if they were to choose to do that. But that's important, that the interest rate environment of 6% as it was trending down meant that people could sell a house with a higher interest rate and buy a house with a lower interest rate. Now, with 50% of homeowners currently having an interest rate of 3.5% or less, they're most likely going to, if they do decide to sell, buy a house either cash or with a higher interest rate than they currently have on their existing property. And so a lot of those individuals are going to turn those homes into a rental. So if that's something that you're thinking about and you want to talk about it more, go ahead. Again, in the description, you can set up a time to meet with us and talk about kind of the plans, so we can game plan that with you, because that is one of the big things that we are seeing right now.